"It hurts," the girl complained about her tongue to her millionaire father. What did her stepmother do? Christmas in Aspenwood always held a special charm that attracted people from all corners of the country. The picturesque mountain town transformed in December, as if a magical cloak descended upon the mountains and the European-style chalets that dotted the landscape. Golden lights hung from old lampposts, shop windows sparkled with red and silver ornaments, and the scent of cinnamon and hot chocolate permeated the cold air rising from the cobblestone streets. Tourists walked arm in arm, children ran between shops asking for chocolates, and the imposing stately homes surrounding the historic centre came alive with garlands on their doors and illuminated. Pine trees on their balconies. It was as if the entire town breathed the same expectation, the same promise that there, in that place, Christmas would be perfect. And for many, it truly was. But not all that glitters carries the light it appears to. Not every decorated house holds within it the warmth it promises to those passing by on the pavement. There was one residence in particular that stood out among the others. It was perched atop a discreet hill, surrounded by high walls and ornate iron gates, with discreet cameras watching every angle of the property. It was the Vancroft mansion. From the outside it looked like a postcard. From the inside it was another story. Henry Vancroft was a successful man. At 42 he had built a solid empire in the real estate sector, with ventures spread across London, Manchester and Edinburgh. His name was synonymous with reliability in the business world. A man of firm posture, a deep voice and a confident gaze, he knew how to conduct a negotiation, how to close multi-million-pound contracts, and how to maintain an impeccable image before partners and specialized press. But what few knew, or perhaps what he himself was reluctant to admit, was that Henry lived more in the corridors of five-star hotels, in air-conditioned meeting rooms, and on executive flights than within his own home. He loved his daughter. That was undeniable. Olivia was 8 years old and was all that remained of a marriage he preferred to bury in his memory. The girl's mother had left when Olivia was only 2 years old, leaving Henry alone with the responsibility of raising a child while running a rapidly expanding business. He tried. Truly he tried. He hired nannies, governesses, private tutors. He did everything possible to ensure Olivia had everything except him. Because Henry didn't know how to stop, he didn't know how to turn off his phone, he didn't know how to say no to another meeting, another contract, another trip. And it was precisely into this void that Caroline Farrell entered. They met at a charity event in London 3 years ago. She was everything he thought he needed. Elegant, educated, with that controlled smile that impressed at formal dinners. Caroline came from a traditional London family that had lost its financial luster over time, but still maintained a respected surname in elite social circles. She knew how to navigate these environments naturally, knew what to say, when to smile, how to behave. And Henry, tired of dealing with everything alone, saw in her the perfect solution. A wife who would organize the house, take care of his daughter, provide that stability he had never managed to build. They married 6 months later, in a discreet but sophisticated ceremony, with few guests and much discretion. At first, everything seemed to work. Caroline took control of the mansion with impressive efficiency. She rearranged the furniture, changed the curtains, redesigned the garden, dismissed old staff, and hired new ones. The house gained a more refined, more modern, more presentable air. Henry was satisfied. He thought he had made the right choice. But what he didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to see, was the price his daughter was paying for that impeccable organization. Olivia was a quiet girl, always had been. From a young age, she learned not to bother, not to ask for too much, not to occupy more space than necessary. She had straight brown hair that fell to her shoulders, large dark eyes that seemed to hold more thoughts than words, and a delicate way of moving, as if she was afraid of breaking something at any moment. She loved to draw. She spent hours in her room with colored pencils and notebooks, creating imaginary landscapes, colorful houses, smiling families. It was her refuge, her safe world. But since Caroline arrived, even this space began to shrink. Her stepmother never yelled, never raised her voice, never lost her composure, and perhaps that was precisely why everything was even harder to perceive. Caroline had a subtle way of imposing control, a cold gaze that made Olivia lower her head instantly, a seemingly harmless comment, but loaded with disapproval. An order given in a sweet tone, but one that allowed no questioning. It was like living under a constant magnifying glass, where every gesture, every word, every breath was evaluated, judged, corrected. In the first few months after the marriage, Olivia still tried to get closer. She brought drawings for Caroline to see, offered to help in the kitchen, asked if she could accompany her shopping. But the answer was always the same, a cold smile, a formal thank you. And then rejection disguised as politeness. Caroline never directly said she didn't want the girl around. She simply created situations where Olivia felt out of place, unnecessary, a nuisance. And little by little, the girl retreated, stopped trying, accepting that her place in that house was increasingly small. Mrs. Clara noticed everything. She was the family's oldest governess, having worked for Henry since before Olivia's birth. She was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair always pulled back in a low bun, hands calloused from so much work, and a heart that ached every time she saw the girl huddled in a corner of the house. Clara tried to compensate. She secretly took biscuits to Olivia's room, folded her clothes with extra care, whispered kind words whenever she had the opportunity. But there were limits. Caroline made it clear, right from the start, that interference would not be tolerated. Clara had already been warned once for letting Olivia help her in the kitchen, another time for lending the girl a book without authorization. So she learned to care in silence, to offer comfort in small things, but always afraid of going too far. December arrived, bringing with it all the anticipation that only Christmas can create. Aspenwood was preparing to receive thousands of visitors. Inns were fully booked, restaurants had exhausted reservations, and downtown shops were open later to meet demand. At the Vancroft mansion, preparations also began early. Caroline hired a team of decorators to transform the house into a true Christmas scene. She wanted to impress. She wanted everything to be impeccable. She planned a grand Christmas Eve dinner with important guests, influential businessmen, people who needed to see that the Vancroft family was synonymous with success and sophistication. Olivia watched everything from afar. She saw men climbing ladders to hang enormous garlands on the facade. She saw boxes being opened. With expensive and delicate ornaments, she saw Caroline giving orders in that firm but polite voice that everyone obeyed without question. The girl even tried to help once. She picked up a box of smaller ornaments and began separating the colorful balls, thinking she could organize them by color, by size, that perhaps this would be useful. But Caroline appeared at the living room door and stopped. She just looked. She said nothing at first. She just stood there with that gaze Olivia knew so well. And then in a soft, almost maternal voice, she said that was not work, if for children, that she might break something, that it would be better to go play in her room. It wasn't a request. It was an order disguised as concern. Olivia returned the ornaments to the box with trembling hands and slowly went upstairs. She locked herself in her room and looked out the window, seeing the town below shining with all those lights. She wanted so much to participate. She wanted so much to feel like she was part of it. But the feeling was always the same, of being superfluous, of being in the way, of being a detail, that hindered the perfection of the picture. The next day, while Caroline was reviewing the dinner menu with the cook, Olivia was in her room drawing. She had created a Christmas scene with a family sitting around a bountiful table, all smiling, all together. There was a girl in the drawing who looked like her, sitting next to a man who looked like her father. Beside him, an empty chair. Olivia looked at that empty chair on the paper and felt a tightness in her chest. She wasn't sure what to draw there. She didn't know if she should draw someone or leave it empty. She decided to leave it as it was. Henry called that afternoon. The call was brief, as always. He was in London, finalizing the last details of an important contract. He said he would be back in a few days before Christmas, and that he would bring a special gift for her. Olivia held the phone tightly and said she missed him. On the other end, her father's voice sounded distant, hurried, with that tone of someone thinking about something else while speaking. He said he missed her too, that they would be together soon, that she should be a good girl and obey Caroline, and he hung up. Olivia stared at the phone in her hand. She wanted to say so many things. She wanted to tell him about the torn drawings she found in the bin last week. She wanted to tell him that sometimes she was hungry, because Caroline said she had eaten enough. She wanted to tell him that she missed him in a way that hurt her whole body. But she said nothing, because whenever she tried to say something like that, her voice disappeared. It got stuck somewhere between her chest and her throat. Days passed, and the tension in the house increased as Christmas approached. Caroline was increasingly demanding, more controlling, more attentive to every minute detail. Anything out of place irritated her. Any failure in executing tasks led to a dry reprimand, a disapproving look, a veiled threat of dismissal. The staff walked on tiptoes. They avoided making noise. They avoided crossing paths with her in the corridors if possible. And Olivia, of course, was the one who felt the weight of that environment the most. One morning the girl was passing through the corridor when she accidentally bumped into a side table where there was a crystal vase with fresh flowers. The vase swayed. Olivia managed to hold it in time, but water splashed out, wetting the Persian rug that covered the floor. She froze. Her heart raced. She looked around, trying to see if anyone had noticed. She tried to dry it quickly with her jacket sleeve, but the stain was already there, visible, accusatory. That's when she heard footsteps. Those firm, rhythmic footsteps she recognized from afar. Caroline appeared at the other end of the corridor. She stopped, looked at the wet rug, looked at Olivia. She said nothing for a few seconds that felt like hours. Then, in that low, controlled voice, she asked what had happened. Olivia tried to explain, stammering, saying it was an accident, that she would clean it, that she would fix it. Caroline listened in silence, and then she said with chilling calm that carelessness has consequences. That responsibility is learned through practical examples. She told the girl to get a bucket, water, and a cloth and clean the entire corridor. Not just the stain, the entire corridor. On her knees. Olivia obeyed. She spent the entire afternoon there scrubbing the cold marble floor, her hands turning red from the friction with the rough cloth and her knees aching against the hard surface. Caroline passed by her a few times during those hours. She never stopped, never asked if she was okay. She just observed for a few seconds and moved on, as if inspecting some work being done by any employee. When she finally finished, it was already getting dark outside. Olivia put away the bucket and went up to her room, her legs trembling with fatigue. She hadn't had dinner. She hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, but she didn't dare go down to the kitchen, afraid of doing something wrong again, afraid of running into Caroline again. So she stayed there, lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling her stomach growl and her eyes burn with tiredness. Mrs. Clara came up later, with a plate of soup hidden under a cloth. She knocked lightly on the door and entered when Olivia opened it. The girl looked at the food, and her eyes filled with tears. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair slowly without saying anything. Sometimes silence was more comforting than any words. Olivia ate the soup in silence, each spoonful seeming to warm not only her body, but also something inside her that was slowly freezing. Before leaving, Clara looked at her with those tired, sad eyes and softly said that things would get better, that her father would be back soon, that Christmas would come and everything would be different. Olivia wanted to believe. She wanted to believe so much, but something inside her no longer could. The next morning, the incident with the tree ornament happened. The Christmas tree in the main living room was enormous, almost touching the high ceiling of the hall. It was decorated with imported baubles, golden ribbons, white lights that blinked in a perfect rhythm. It was beautiful, intimidating. Olivia was passing by, just observing, when Caroline called her. She asked her to get a box that was on a nearby chair. Olivia obeyed. She carefully climbed onto the chair, picked up the box, but as she descended, her foot slipped. She lost her balance. The box fell, and with it, an old blown glass ornament that was on the edge of the table next to it fell as well. The sound of glass shattering on the floor echoed through the hall like a scream. Olivia froze, staring at the scattered shards, feeling her heart pound so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. Caroline was on the other side of the room. She turned slowly, walked over with measured steps. She stopped in front of the girl and looked down at the glittering shards scattered across the wooden floor. She didn't scream. She didn't raise her voice. She just said, with that coldness that was worse than any scream, that the ornament was a family heirloom. That it had sentimental value, that it couldn't be replaced, and that, since Olivia had broken it, she would be the one to clean it, with her own hands, without gloves, to learn to be more careful. Olivia knelt on the floor and began to pick up the shards. Her hands trembled. A larger piece cut her index finger. Blood dripped onto the floor, mixing with the glass fragments. The pain was sharp, but the fear was greater. She continued picking up the pieces one by one, feeling new cuts appearing on her palm, on her fingers, small and stinging. Caroline stood there watching, arms crossed, until all the shards were collected. Then she told Olivia to go wash her hands and not leave blood anywhere in the house. The girl went up to the bathroom and washed her hands in the sink, watching the water turn red before draining away. The cuts weren't deep, but they hurt. She wrapped toilet paper around her fingers and stayed there, sitting on the cold bathroom floor, hugging her knees and trying not to cry too loudly. Because if she cried loudly, Caroline might hear, and if she heard, she might come, and if she came, she would say it was drama, that she was exaggerating, that she needed to be stronger. So Olivia swallowed her tears, pushed them down, kept them with all the other things she couldn't say, couldn't show, couldn't feel. Later that same day, she realized her drawing notebook had disappeared. It was a simple notebook with a blue hardcover, full of scribbles, sketches, imaginary worlds she created when reality became too heavy. She searched the entire room, under the bed, inside the wardrobe, behind the desk. Nothing. She carefully went downstairs and to the laundry room, where things that went missing sometimes appeared, and that's where she found it. The pages were torn, crumpled, thrown into the large bin in the corner of the laundry room. Olivia recognized her drawings, the colorful house, the smiling family, the dog she always wanted to have, all destroyed, torn into small pieces, as if they had never had any value. She stood there, holding the edge of the bin, looking at those pieces of paper that no longer made any sense. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, feeling something inside her break too, as if each torn page was a piece of herself being discarded. She put some pieces in her pocket, without really knowing why, perhaps to prove to herself that it had existed, that those drawings had been real, that she had been happy doing it, even if only for a short time. Henry called again that night. He said everything was fine, that he would be back in 3 days, on Christmas Eve. Olivia held the phone and thought about telling him, thought about saying she was scared, that something wasn't right, that she needed him. But when she opened her mouth, all she managed to say was that everything was fine, that she was looking forward to Christmas, that she couldn't wait to see him, because she had learned that complaining was useless, that crying changed nothing, that it was best to pretend everything was fine, always. And then Henry said he loved her. He said she was such a good girl, so well-behaved. He said he was proud of her. And he hung up, leaving Olivia alone in the dark room, holding that phone as if it were the only thing still connecting her to somewhere safe. The following days were a blur. Caroline intensified the preparations. The house was unrecognizable, transformed into a perfect setting to impress. But for Olivia, each day became harder. She was constantly kept away from the main rooms, instructed not to make noise, told to stay in her room whenever there was movement in the house. And she obeyed, always obeyed, because she didn't know what else to do. Mrs. Clara tried to be present, but Caroline noticed. And each time she noticed, she found a way to send the governess away, assigning her tasks in other parts of the house, keeping her busy and away from the girl. Clara felt helpless. She wanted to do more. She wanted to protect that child she saw wasting away each day, but she was afraid of losing her job, afraid of making things worse for Olivia, afraid of Caroline. And so, December advanced, taking with it any shred of hope that remained in that house. The Christmas lights shone outside, but inside the Vancroft mansion, the darkness grew deeper. Olivia walked on tiptoes, breathed, counting to 10, spoke only when asked. She was 8 years old but already carried on her shoulders a weight that even adults struggle with. And Christmas, which for everyone else was synonymous with joy, for her began to seem like just another day when she would have to pretend everything was fine. Christmas Eve was approaching, and with it, a series of events that would change everything forever. But Olivia still didn't know. She still believed that this was her destiny, that this was her life, that there was nothing beyond those high walls, that heavy silence, that constant feeling of always being wrong, always superfluous, always being too much, and at the same time never being enough. Christmas Eve dawned with a heavy sky over Aspenwood. Grey clouds covered the mountains, and a fine drizzle began to fall in that discreet way that wets slowly but never stops. The town, however, continued to buzz with life. Tourists filled the main streets, entering and leaving artisan chocolate shops, taking photos in front of historic buildings decorated with giant red bows. There was Christmas music playing in the squares, mulled wine vendors on the corners, children running with Santa hats on their heads. Christmas was there, palpable, vibrant, impossible to ignore. At the Vancroft mansion, the activity was frantic. Caroline woke before 6 in the morning and began giving orders even before having coffee. The dinner would be that night promptly at 8 o'clock, and everything needed to be impeccable. She had invited 15 couples from the local high society, influential businessmen, a local councillor and his wife, as well as 2 journalists from a decoration magazine who would do a feature on the house. It was the perfect opportunity to consolidate the Vancrofts' image as a family of prestige, refinement, and success. And Caroline would accept nothing less than perfection. The cook and her 2 assistants worked non-stop from early morning, preparing sophisticated appetizers, elaborate main courses, desserts that looked like works of art. The scent of rosemary, roasted garlic, and red wine spread through the house, mixing with the aroma of fresh pine coming from the Christmas tree in the hall. Staff came and went, carrying dishes, arranging chairs, polishing crystals, folding napkins into intricate shapes, all under the watchful and critical eye of Caroline, who inspected every detail like a general supervising troops before battle. Olivia woke up to the noise. She lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the hurried footsteps downstairs, the muffled voices, the sound of objects being moved from one place to another. She knew today would be a difficult day. She knew Caroline would be even more tense, even more demanding, even more dangerous. The girl slowly got up, put on an old sweatshirt that was too big for her, and went downstairs carefully, trying not to make a sound. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Clara preparing a tray of sliced fruit. The governess looked at her with that tired smile that had become her trademark and offered her a piece of bread with jam. Olivia accepted gratefully and ate in silence, leaning against the counter, observing the activity around her. The kitchen assistants barely looked at her. They were too focused on their own tasks, too worried about not making mistakes, about not attracting their employer's negative attention. That's when Caroline entered the kitchen. All movement seemed to slow down for a second. She wore a beige linen dress, her hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, light but precise makeup. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine. She looked around, inspecting, and her eyes stopped on Olivia. She said nothing for a few seconds. She just looked. And then, in that soft but firm voice, she said that the girl shouldn't be there, that the kitchen was too busy, that she was in the way, that it would be best for her to go back to her room and stay there until dinner time. Olivia put the bread back on the plate, still half-eaten, and left the kitchen with her head bowed. She went upstairs slowly, feeling the weight of each step. She locked herself in her room and looked out the window. Down below, she saw the whole town lit up, saw families strolling together, saw life happening for everyone but her. And once again she felt that sense of being trapped, of being on the wrong side of the glass, of being able to see but never touch. The hours dragged on. Olivia tried to distract herself by reading an old book she found on the shelf, but the words made no sense. Her mind was elsewhere. She thought of her father. Henry had called the night before, saying he was returning, that he would arrive in the middle of the afternoon. She counted the minutes, because when he was there, maybe things would be different. Maybe Caroline would behave. Maybe she could come down, have dinner with them, feel like she was part of the family. Maybe. The sound of a car arriving made Olivia jump out of bed. She ran to the window and saw Henry's black sedan parking in front of the main entrance. Her heart pounded. She saw her father get out of the car, pick up a briefcase from the back seat, adjust his suit jacket. He looked different. He seemed tired. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his posture was slightly stooped, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. But it was him. Finally, it was him. Olivia ran out of her room, jumped down the stairs, crossed the corridor, and reached the front door, just as Henry was entering. He saw her, and his face lit up with a smile. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and opened his arms. Olivia threw herself into them, hugging her father with all her might, feeling the familiar scent of his cologne, the texture of his suit jacket fabric, the warmth she hadn't felt in so long. Henry hugged her back tightly and asked how she was, if she had been a good girl, if she was excited for Christmas. Olivia said yes to everything, her voice choked, trying not to cry because she knew if she started, she wouldn't be able to stop. Henry kissed the top of her head and said he had brought a special gift, but she could only open it the next day. Olivia didn't care about the gift. She just wanted him to stay. She just wanted him not to leave again. Caroline appeared in the corridor at that moment, impeccable as always, with that smile she used in public. She greeted Henry with a kiss on the cheek, asked about his trip, commented that he looked tired and suggested he take a shower and rest before dinner. Henry agreed. He looked at Olivia and said they would talk more later, that she should go play while he got ready. The girl nodded, but her heart tightened. It was always like this, always later, always after, never now. She went back to her room and waited for her father to come up, to knock on the door, to sit on her bed and talk for real. But the minutes passed and nothing happened. She heard Henry's voice in the next room talking to Caroline. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was serious, almost tense. Caroline responded in her calm voice, explaining something, justifying something. And then silence. When the clock struck 7 in the evening, someone knocked on Olivia's door. It was one of the kitchen assistants, a young woman with a round face and kind eyes. She entered shyly and said that Caroline had sent word that Olivia would not be coming down for dinner, that there were too many guests, that it would be too formal an event for children, that it would be best for her to have dinner in her room. The young woman handed her a tray with a plate of food and left quickly, before Olivia could ask anything. The girl stared at the tray. A small piece of chicken, a little rice, some peas. It didn't look anything like the sophisticated food being served downstairs. She placed the tray on her desk and sat on her bed, hugging her knees. She tried to understand, tried to find a reason that made sense, but she couldn't. All she could feel was that pain in her chest that was becoming all too familiar. Downstairs, dinner began promptly at 8 o'clock. Guests arrived in expensive cars, dressed in elegant clothes, bringing imported wines and compliments for the hostess. Caroline greeted everyone with her practiced charm, leading them to the main hall where the table was impeccably set. Scented candles, arrangements of white flowers, porcelain dishes, crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier light. Everything perfect, everything calculated. Henry stood beside her, greeting guests, shaking hands, exchanging polite smiles. But his mind was elsewhere. Throughout his shower, throughout the time he spent getting ready, he couldn't stop thinking about his daughter. There was something different about her, something in her eyes, a sadness he didn't remember seeing before, or perhaps it had always been there, and he had never truly paid attention. Dinner proceeded with conversations about business, politics, international travel. Caroline was the perfect hostess, ensuring all glasses were full, all dishes were served on time, and the ambient music was at the ideal volume. She received compliments on the decor, the food, the good taste of the house, and she smiled, thanked, deflected credit to suppliers and decorators. But everyone knew she was in charge. At one point, one of the guests asked about Henry's daughter. She said she had heard of her but had never seen her. Caroline answered before Henry could open his mouth. She said with that sweet smile that Olivia was resting, that she was a shy child who wasn't comfortable at events with many people, that they respected her space. The explanation sounded reasonable. No one questioned it. The conversation moved on to another topic, but Henry was bothered by it. He looked at Caroline, trying to understand if there was something behind that quick, rehearsed answer. She noticed his gaze and touched his hand under the table, squeezing lightly as if to say everything was under control. He let it go. He smiled back at the guests, but something kept gnawing at him. Meanwhile, in her room, Olivia sat by the window, listening to the laughter and conversations rising from downstairs. The voices mingled, forming a continuous sound of celebration, joy, life. And there she was, alone, in the dark, with a plate of cold food on her desk and a tightness in her chest that wouldn't go away. She tried to call her father's phone, but the number appeared as unavailable. He must have left his phone in his room or on silent because of the guests. It was then that Olivia had an idea. She took a piece of paper and a pen. She wrote in that round, careful child's handwriting. She wrote few words, but each one carried an enormous weight. She wrote that she was scared, that she wanted her father to come upstairs, that she needed to talk to him. She folded the paper carefully and tiptoed out of her room. The corridor was empty. Everyone was in the living room, busy with dinner. Olivia went down a few steps, hid behind the wall, trying to see if she could hand the note to someone who could take it to her father. That's when she saw Mrs. Clara hurrying past, carrying an empty tray back to the kitchen. She went down a few more steps and called out softly. Clara looked back, saw the girl, and her face filled with concern. Olivia ran down and handed her the folded paper. She whispered for her to take it to her father. Clara looked at the note, then at the girl, and her eyes filled with tears. She put the paper in her apron pocket and said yes, she would take it. But before she could do anything else, Caroline's voice cut through the air. She was standing at the entrance to the corridor, observing the scene with that cold gaze that made time stop. She asked what was happening, why Olivia wasn't in her room, why she was bothering the staff during dinner. Olivia froze. Clara tried to explain, stammering, saying the girl just wanted a glass of water, that she was going to get it and take it to her room. Caroline didn't buy the explanation. She told Clara to go back to work immediately and for Olivia to go upstairs at once. The girl obeyed. She went upstairs slowly, feeling her legs tremble. Caroline followed her to her room, entered behind her, and closed the door. She stood there just looking with that expression Olivia knew too well, and then, in a low voice but loaded with threat, she said she would not tolerate that kind of behavior, that the girl was being too spoiled, that she needed to learn to stay in her place, that if she tried something like that again, the consequences would be serious. Olivia bowed her head and murmured an apology. Caroline stood there for a few more seconds, as if to make sure the message had been understood, and then she left, closing the door hard enough to make the girl jump. Olivia stood there in the middle of the room, feeling tears stream down her face silently. She wiped them with the back of her hand and returned to bed, curling up under the covers. Mrs. Clara, downstairs, put the note in her pocket and continued working with a heavy heart. She wanted to do something. She wanted to help, but she was afraid. So afraid. Afraid of Caroline. Afraid of losing her job. Afraid of making things worse for Olivia. So she continued serving, cleaning, obeying, while that piece of paper burned in her apron pocket like a silent accusation. Dinner ended around 11 o'clock that night. The guests left praising everything, promising to return the invitation, thanking them for the wonderful evening. Caroline bid farewell to each one with that perfect smile, waving from the door as the cars departed one by one. When the last guest left, she took a deep breath and closed the door. She turned to Henry and said it had been a success, that everyone had loved it, that the magazine feature would be incredible. Henry nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He asked about Olivia. He said he wanted to go up and say good night to her. Caroline said the girl must already be asleep, that it was better not to wake her, that he could do it the next day. Henry hesitated, but eventually agreed. He was tired, exhausted in fact. The last few weeks had been too intense. He would go up, take a quick shower and sleep. The next day would be different. The next day he would spend time with his daughter. But as he went upstairs, something bothered him. A strange feeling, as if he was forgetting something important, as if there was something wrong that he couldn't see. He stopped in front of Olivia's room and stood there for a few seconds, looking at the closed door. He thought about knocking, about going in, about checking if everything was okay. But Caroline's voice calling from the next room distracted him. He sighed and moved on, leaving his daughter's door behind. The night passed heavy and silent. Olivia woke a few times, startled, with confused nightmares that mixed voices, shadows, and that cold gaze that haunted her even in her dreams. Each time she woke, she looked at the door, hoping her father would appear. But the door remained closed. The corridor remained empty. And she remained alone. On the morning of December 25th, Christmas finally arrived. The sun rose timidly behind the clouds, and the town awoke with that special atmosphere of knowing it was a different day. Families woke up early to open presents, to prepare special lunches, to enjoy the day together. At the Vancroft mansion, however, the morning began in silence. Olivia woke up hungry. She hadn't eaten properly the night before, and her stomach complained. She got out of bed, put on a coat over her pajamas, and went downstairs slowly. The house was strangely quiet. The staff hadn't arrived yet. Caroline and Henry were probably still asleep. It was the perfect opportunity to get something from the kitchen without bothering anyone. But when she reached the kitchen, she found the door locked. She tried the doorknob again, disbelieving. It was indeed locked. She looked around, confused, trying to understand. That's when she saw a note taped to the door. In Caroline's perfect handwriting, it said that the kitchen would be closed until noon, to avoid waste and maintain organization. Any needs should be communicated directly to her. Olivia stared at the note, feeling her hunger tighten even more. But she didn't dare go upstairs and knock on Caroline's bedroom door. She didn't dare bother her. So she went back to her room and stayed there, lying down, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the rumbling in her stomach and the feeling of emptiness that went far beyond physical hunger. It was in this moment of fragility, accumulated fatigue and deep loneliness, that Olivia made a decision. She wanted to do something. She wanted to show that she was good. She wanted to prove that she deserved to be there. So she thought she could make tea for Caroline, take it to her room, a gesture of kindness, a silent plea for peace. She waited until she heard noise in the corridor, indicating that someone had woken up. She went downstairs again and found Mrs. Clara unlocking the kitchen door. The governess looked at her with surprise and concern, asking what she was doing awake so early. Olivia explained her plan. Clara hesitated, clearly worried, but eventually agreed to help. They prepared chamomile tea, put it in a delicate porcelain teapot, and arranged a cup on a small tray. Olivia carefully picked up the tray and started to go upstairs. The teapot was heavier than she expected, and her hands still hurt from the cuts of the previous days. But she kept going, focused, determined. She was almost at the top of the stairs when she tripped. Her foot got caught in the hem of her pajamas and she lost her balance. She tried to hold the tray, but the teapot tipped over. The hot liquid spilled over the side, falling directly onto her hand. The pain was instant and excruciating. Olivia dropped the tray by reflex, and everything crashed to the floor. The teapot shattered, the cup broke, the tea spread across the steps, and her hand was on fire. The skin immediately turned red, beginning to blister. Olivia held her hand against her chest, biting her lip hard to keep from screaming. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. She couldn't make a sound. She couldn't wake Caroline like that. She ran down the remaining steps and returned to the kitchen, where Mrs. Clara saw her condition and almost cried out in alarm. The governess carefully took the girl's hand and placed it under cold water, but the pain remained intense, throbbing. That's when they heard footsteps. Caroline came downstairs, drawn by the sound of breaking crockery. She saw the mess in the corridor, the scattered shards, the tea running down the steps. Her expression changed instantly. That forced calm gave way to poorly disguised irritation. She entered the kitchen and saw Olivia with her hand under the water, trembling pale. She asked what had happened. Mrs. Clara tried to explain, but Caroline interrupted her. She said she didn't want explanations. She said she saw clearly what had happened, that once again Olivia had been careless, irresponsible, had broken expensive crockery and made a mess. She ordered the girl to clean everything immediately. Clara tried to intervene, saying her hand was burned, that she needed care. Caroline said she would clean the mess she made first. Olivia returned to the corridor with a cloth and a broom. Her hand hurt so much she could barely hold them, but she tried. She gathered the larger shards with her good hand, wiped the wet floor, cleaned step by step, as tears fell silently. Caroline stood there, supervising, arms crossed, watching every movement with that critical gaze that weighed like lead. When she finally finished, Olivia went back to her room. She wrapped her hand in an old cloth she found in the wardrobe and lay on the bed, curled up, feeling the pain throb in waves that seemed never to end. The burn stung, her skin was swollen, and she didn't know what to do. She couldn't ask for help, she couldn't complain. She could only wait for it to pass. She could only endure. And that's how she spent Christmas morning, alone in her room, with her burned hand poorly bandaged, hungry, cold, afraid. While downstairs life went on, while Henry woke up knowing nothing, while Caroline organized lunch as if nothing had happened, while the world spun and she remained there, invisible, silent, shrinking more and more into herself. But what Olivia didn't know was that this would be the last day like that things were about to change in a way no one expected, that the truth was beginning to leak through the cracks of that perfect facade, and that her father, finally, was about to see what had been in front of him all along. Henry woke up around 10 o'clock on the morning of the 25th. He had slept heavily, heavier than he had in months. The accumulated fatigue of the past weeks had finally taken its toll, and he had passed out as soon as his head hit the pillow. As he opened his eyes, it took him a few seconds to orient himself, to remember it was Christmas, that he was home, that his daughter was waiting for him. He sat up in bed and ran his hand over his face, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep that still insisted on pulling him back to the mattress. Caroline was no longer in the room. She had probably woken up early, as always, to organize things. Henry took a quick shower, dressed in casual clothes, and went downstairs for coffee. He found his wife in the dining room, reviewing a list on her tablet, with that concentrated expression she always had when she was in productive mode. She looked up when he entered, smiled lightly, and said good morning. She asked if he had slept well, if he wanted strong or weak coffee, if he preferred toast or a croissant. It was always like that. Efficient, organized, impeccable. Henry sat at the table and accepted the coffee she poured. He asked about Olivia. He said he wanted to say good morning to her, that he wanted to spend the morning together. Caroline replied that the girl was still asleep, that it had been a long night for everyone and it was better to let her rest. Henry accepted the explanation, but something inside him was bothered again by that quick, rehearsed answer. He drank his coffee in silence, trying to identify what exactly was bothering him. The day continued with a strange slowness. Henry tried to relax, tried to enjoy the feeling of being home without urgent commitments, but he couldn't. His mind constantly returned to his daughter, to that look she had when he arrived the day before, to the way she hugged him, as if holding onto a lifeline, to her silence when he said they would talk. Later? Always later. Always after. What if later was taking too long? Around noon, Henry went up to Olivia's room. He knocked lightly on the door and waited. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He opened the door slowly and looked inside. The girl was lying on the bed, her back to the door, curled up under the blanket. He entered and approached, thinking she was asleep, but when he went around the bed and saw her face, he realized her eyes were open. They were fixed on the wall, empty, distant. He sat on the edge of the bed and lightly touched her shoulder. Olivia slowly turned and looked at him. She tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Henry felt a tightness in his chest. He asked if she was okay, if she had slept well, if she wanted to come down for breakfast with him. Olivia said yes, she was fine, she would be down soon, but she didn't move. She stayed there, lying down, looking at her father, as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. It was then that Henry noticed the cloth wrapped around her hand. He frowned and asked what it was. Olivia tried to hide her hand under the blanket, but he was quicker. He carefully held her wrist and unwrapped the cloth. What he saw made him freeze. The skin was red, swollen, with blisters beginning to form. A burn, and it wasn't small. He asked what had happened. His voice came out louder than he intended, laden with concern and something that was starting to feel like fear. Olivia hesitated. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again, and then, in a voice so low he almost didn't hear it, she explained that she had tried to make some tea and the teapot had fallen, that it had been an accident, that it wasn't serious. Henry looked at that small hand, at the blisters forming on the delicate skin, at the tremor in her fingers, and something inside him began to crack, as if a wall he had built over the years, made of justifications, of busyness, of blind trust, began to crumble brick by brick. He asked when it had happened. She said it was that morning. He asked if Caroline knew. She nodded, but said nothing more. Henry got up from the bed with an abrupt movement. He told Olivia not to move, that he would be back in a minute. He went downstairs with heavy steps and found Caroline in the living room arranging flowers for lunch. He asked why she hadn't told him about the burn, why she hadn't taken care of the girl's hand, why she hadn't called a doctor. Caroline stopped what she was doing and looked at him with that irritating calm. She said it was nothing serious, that children always get hurt, that it's part of it, that Olivia was dramatic, exaggerated things, that she had cleaned the wound and told the girl to put cold water on it, that everything was under control. Henry felt anger rise, but tried to control himself. He said he was going to take Olivia to the hospital to make sure everything was okay. Caroline said that was unnecessary, that it would ruin Christmas, that the doctors would say the same thing she had already done. But Henry was no longer listening. He turned around and went back up to his daughter's room. He grabbed a thick coat from her wardrobe and told her to put it on. Olivia obeyed without question, her eyes wide, not quite understanding what was happening. Henry helped her put on the coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck to protect her from the cold, and picked her up. She was too light, lighter than an 8-year-old girl should be. They went downstairs together, and Henry walked straight through the living room, ignoring Caroline, who was calling his name in that controlled voice, but beginning to lose her composure. He opened the front door, felt the cold afternoon air hit his face, and walked to the car. He put Olivia in the back seat, buckled her seatbelt carefully so as not to hurt her burned hand, and got in the car. He started the engine and drove towards the hospital before Caroline could say anything else. On the way, Henry constantly looked in the rearview mirror, watching his daughter in the back seat. She was quiet, looking out the window, her good hand holding her injured hand against her chest. He asked if it hurt much. She said no, but the way she bit her lower lip said otherwise. He drove faster. Aspenwood Hospital was about 15 minutes from the mansion. It was a modern, well-equipped building, prepared to serve both residents and the tourists who filled the town all year round. Henry parked in front of the emergency room, picked Olivia up again, and practically ran inside. The receptionist looked at the girl, saw her hand wrapped in an improvised bandage, and immediately called a nurse. Olivia was taken to a treatment room, and Henry went with her, holding her good hand the entire time. The doctor who attended them was a middle-aged man, with thin-rimmed glasses and a gentle way of speaking. He examined the burn carefully, asking questions about how it had happened, how much time had passed if she had felt dizzy or nauseous. Olivia answered in monosyllables, always looking at her father before speaking, as if asking for permission. The doctor cleaned the wound, applied a special ointment, and properly bandaged her hand. He said it was a second-degree burn, that it would hurt for a few days, but with the right care, it would heal without serious consequences. He prescribed painkillers and an ointment to apply twice a day, and then he paused. He looked at Olivia, then at Henry, and asked if he could speak with him. Privately. Henry told Olivia to wait there with the nurse and went out with the doctor into the corridor. As soon as the door closed, the doctor got straight to the point. He said there were more injuries besides the burn. That during the examination, he had noticed old marks on her knees, scratches on her fingers that seemed to have been caused by glass shards, and what appeared to be a small, older burn on her tongue. He asked if Henry knew anything, if there was anything he should know. Henry was speechless. He felt the ground give way beneath his feet. The doctor's words echoed in his head but made no sense. Marks on her knees, scratches on her fingers, a burn on her tongue. How had he not seen any of this? How had he let this happen? The doctor continued speaking, explaining that by protocol they would have to notify Child Protective Services in cases of possible risk to the child, that he wasn't accusing anyone, but that it was standard procedure. Henry nodded mechanically. His mind was elsewhere. He was thinking back to all the times he came home and barely greeted his daughter. To all the trips he took without a second thought. To all the times he believed everything was fine just because Caroline said it was. To all the times Olivia tried to talk to him, and he said later, always later. Guilt came like a wave, heavy and suffocating. He returned to the room where Olivia was waiting. She looked at him with those big, frightened eyes, trying to decipher her father's expression. Henry knelt in front of her and held her face between his hands. He said he was so sorry that he hadn't noticed, that he should have noticed, that he would never leave her alone again, that he would take care of her, that he would protect her. And this time they weren't empty words. This time it was a promise he intended to keep, no matter the cost. Olivia began to cry. Not that silent crying she had learned to do, but a loud, deep cry from someone who had been holding it in for too long. Henry pulled her into a tight embrace and let her cry. Let everything that was stored inside come out. They stayed there, hugging in the middle of that cold hospital room, while the world outside continued to celebrate Christmas. When they finally left the hospital, it was already getting dark. Henry put Olivia in the car again, but this time he didn't go home. He stopped at a pharmacy to get the medicines, then stopped at a diner and bought a sandwich and juice for her. He realized he hadn't asked if she had eaten lunch. He realized he didn't know a lot of basic things about his own daughter's routine, and that hurt more than anything else. Olivia ate slowly with her good hand while Henry drove aimlessly. He just knew he didn't want to go back to that house yet. He didn't want to see Caroline. He didn't want to pretend everything was normal, because nothing was normal. Nothing was well. And he needed to understand what the hell was going on. They ended up stopping at a viewpoint that overlooked the entire town. The Christmas lights twinkled below, creating a sea of golden and colorful dots. It was beautiful. It was magical. But Henry couldn't feel anything but an enormous emptiness in his chest. He looked at Olivia beside him and saw that she was also looking at the lights, but with a distant expression, as if she were somewhere else. He asked if she wanted to talk, if there was anything she needed to tell him. Olivia remained silent for a long time, and then, slowly, she began to speak. She told him about the ornament she broke and how she had to pick up the shards with her hands. She told him about the torn drawing notebook. She told him about the times she was locked in her room without food. She told him about how Caroline spoke to her, about the looks, about the constant fear of doing something wrong. Henry listened in silence, his jaw clenched and his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every word was like a stab. Every story was proof of his absence, his negligence, his failure as a father. He had failed. He had failed in every possible way. And now he was there, having to listen to his own daughter tell him about suffering she should never have experienced. When Olivia finished speaking, they fell silent again. A heavy silence laden with everything that couldn't be undone, but that needed to be confronted. And then Henry made the promise again. He looked into his daughter's eyes and said he would never let this happen again, that he would change, that he would be present, that he would protect her from anything and anyone. And this time, Olivia believed him. It was past 8 in the evening when they finally returned to the mansion. Henry entered through the front door with Olivia by the hand. Caroline was in the living room sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine in her hand and an expression that mixed concern with irritation. She stood up when she saw them enter and began to speak, asking where they had been, saying she had been worried, that she had called several times and he hadn't answered. Henry ignored her completely. He took Olivia straight to her room, helped her change clothes, gave her the medicines the doctor had prescribed and stayed there until she fell asleep. When he finally went downstairs, he found Caroline waiting for him, arms crossed, with that expression he was beginning to see differently. It was no longer elegance, it was control, it was manipulation, it was coldness. She started to speak, but he interrupted her. He said they needed to talk, that he had seen things he didn't like, that he had heard things that worried him. Caroline immediately changed tactics. Her tone became softer, more conciliatory. She said she understood his concern, that she was also worried, that Olivia was a difficult child, that she tried her best, but the girl was resistant, dramatic, always making up stories for attention. Henry shook his head. He said he didn't believe that, not anymore, that he would investigate, that he would find out what was really happening. Caroline laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. She said he was being manipulated by a spoiled child, that he didn't know anything because he was never home, that she was the one who took care of everything while he traveled and pretended to be the perfect father. The discussion escalated. Harsh words were exchanged on both sides, and in the midst of it all, Henry realized something. He realized he didn't know that woman, that perhaps he had never known her, that he had married an image, an idea, a convenient solution to a problem he didn't want to solve alone. And now he was paying the price. His daughter was paying the price. The night ended with Caroline locking herself in the guest room and Henry sitting in the living room in the dark with his head in his hands. He had so many decisions to make, so many things to fix, but where to start? How to undo years of absence? How to regain his daughter's trust? How to protect her from now on? It was then that he remembered Mrs. Clara. The governess had always been there, always saw everything. Perhaps she knew more things, perhaps she could help. He decided that the next day he would talk to her, that he would discover the whole truth no matter how painful it was, because he couldn't pretend anymore. He couldn't close his eyes anymore. His daughter needed him. And this time, he wouldn't fail. He slowly went up to Olivia's room and entered silently. She was sleeping restlessly, moving under the blanket, mumbling something unintelligible. Henry sat on the chair beside the bed and stayed there, watching, silently promising that he would fix it, that he would do things differently, that he would be the father she always deserved to have. And as the night advanced silently over Aspenwood, as the Christmas lights continued to shine outside, inside that mansion, something was changing. The truth was beginning to emerge. The masks were starting to fall, and nothing would be the same again. Henry didn't sleep that night. He stayed there in the chair beside his daughter's bed, thinking about everything that had happened, everything he hadn't noticed, everything he needed to do from now on. And when the sun finally began to rise on the 26th, he had already made a decision. He would uncover the whole truth. He would protect Olivia, and he would do whatever was necessary to ensure she never went through what she did again. The war was just beginning, but this time he wouldn't back down. This time he would fight. For his daughter, for justice, for the truth that had been hidden for so long behind that perfect facade. The morning of December 26th dawned with a dense fog covering Aspenwood. The cold was more intense than in previous days, and the town, which on Christmas Day had been bustling with activity and joy, now seemed to breathe more slowly, as if it, too, needed to recover from the celebration. In homes, families woke up late, enjoyed their presents, and had hearty breakfasts with leftovers from dinner. It was a day of rest, of pleasant laziness, of being together without haste. At the Vancroft mansion, however, the atmosphere was quite different. Henry woke up in the chair beside Olivia's bed, his body aching and his mind even more tired. He looked at his daughter and saw that she was still sleeping, finally at peace after a restless night. He carefully got up so as not to wake her, stretched his body trying to undo the knots in his back, and left the room silently. He went downstairs and straight to the kitchen. He found Mrs. Clara already awake, preparing breakfast. The governess looked at him with a worried expression, as if she had spent the entire night waiting for this moment. Henry asked her to sit down. He said they needed to talk. Clara hesitated, looking around as if afraid Caroline might suddenly appear, but eventually pulled up a chair and sat at the kitchen table. Henry began by asking direct questions. He wanted to know how long this had been going on. He wanted to know exactly what Clara had seen. He wanted all the details, no matter how painful they were. The governess took a deep breath and began to tell. She spoke about the first months after the marriage, when Caroline subtly began to isolate Olivia. She spoke about the punishments disguised as discipline. She spoke about the times the girl went without food. She spoke about the torn drawing notebook, about the broken ornament, about all the small and large abuses she had witnessed but had been afraid to report. With each word, Henry felt the guilt tighten harder in his chest. How had he not seen any of this? How had he let it get to this point? Clara noticed his suffering and placed her hand over his on the table. She said it wasn't his fault, that Caroline was very good at hiding, at manipulating, at making everything seem normal when other people were around, that even she, who was there every day, took time to understand the gravity of the situation. It was then that Henry asked if there was any proof, anything that could corroborate what Olivia and Clara were saying. The governess remained silent, for a few seconds as if making a difficult decision, and then she got up, went to her staff room at the back of the house, and returned holding something small in her hands. A USB drive. She placed it on the table, looked at Henry, and said there were security cameras scattered around the house, that she had access to the system, that in recent months she had started making copies of some recordings, afraid that one day they might be deleted. Henry took the USB drive with trembling hands. He thanked Clara, his voice choked, and went to his office. He locked the door, turned on the computer, and inserted the device. There were dozens of files organized by date. He started watching, and what he saw in the next 2 hours completely destroyed him. In one of the recordings, Olivia was kneeling in the corridor, cleaning the floor with a cloth, while Caroline stood there watching with that cold expression. In another, the girl tried to reach something on a high shelf, and Caroline simply walked past her without offering help, as if she were invisible. There was a particularly painful video in which Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table alone, eating a piece of dry bread while the staff prepared an elaborate meal that was clearly not for her. And then there were the images from the morning of the 25th, when the girl burned her hand with the tea. The video showed everything. It showed Caroline watching from afar. It showed her forcing Olivia to clean the mess even with her hand burned. It showed complete indifference to the child's suffering. Henry watched everything with his eyes fixed on the screen, feeling something inside him definitively break. These were not just acts of negligence. It was cruelty. It was abuse. It was a calculated, cold malice disguised as education and discipline, and he, like an idiot, had let it happen. He had trusted blindly. He had chosen convenience instead of being present. He had failed in the worst possible way. He saved all the files to another device, put the original USB drive in a safe place, and left the office. Caroline had not yet appeared. She was probably in the guest room waiting for the tension to subside, waiting to regain control of the situation with that subtle manipulation she mastered so well. But it wouldn't work this time. Henry wouldn't let it. He went up to Olivia's room and found the girl awake, sitting on the bed, looking at her bandaged hand. He entered and sat beside her. He said he needed to take her back to the hospital for a follow-up appointment, that they would be out for a few hours. Olivia nodded and let her father help her get dressed. As he put a coat on her, Henry whispered that she no longer needed to be afraid, that things would change, that he would take care of her. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia smiled. A small, shy but real smile. They left through the front door without telling anyone. On the way to the hospital, Henry made a call. He called a family lawyer he knew in London, briefly explained the situation, and asked for guidance on the next steps. The lawyer was clear. With the recordings and the medical report, he would have a strong case. But it would be important to gather more evidence, talk to witnesses, perhaps file a police report. And above all, protect the child immediately. At the hospital, the doctor who had attended Olivia the day before performed a complete evaluation. He examined not only the recent burn, but also all the other marks he had identified. He documented everything photographically, made a detailed report, and said he had already contacted Child Protective Services, that someone would be in touch in the next few hours. Henry thanked him and assured him he would cooperate with any necessary investigation. When they left the hospital, it was already noon. Henry didn't want to go home yet. He needed time to think, to plan the next steps. So he took Olivia to lunch at a restaurant in the town centre. It was a simple, cozy place with small wooden tables and a homemade menu. They sat near the window and ordered food. While they waited, they talked. They talked for real, for the first time in a long time. Henry asked about school, about her favourite subjects, about the drawing she liked to do, and Olivia, little by little, opened up, spoke, remembered what it was like to be a child again. It was during this lunch that Henry realized how much he had lost, how much he had let slip away. His daughter was there, growing, changing, living, and he hadn't seen any of it. He had let a stranger take control. He had trusted blindly. He had chosen work, business, professional success, instead of being present. And now he was paying the price. But at least now he was seeing. Now he was there, and now he would do things differently. After lunch, they went for a walk through the historic centre. Olivia stopped in front of a toy store and gazed at the display window. Henry asked if she wanted to go in. She hesitated as if she didn't have permission, but eventually agreed. Inside the store, she walked slowly between the shelves, touching the toys with her good hand, stopping to look at dolls, games, colouring books. Henry said she could choose whatever she wanted. Olivia looked at him with disbelief, as if testing if it was true. And then, with a shy smile, she chose a set of coloured pencils and a new drawing notebook. It was modest, it was simple, but to her, it meant the world. When they finally returned to the mansion, it was already getting dark. Henry entered with Olivia by the hand and found Caroline in the living room. She was dressed, made up as if nothing had happened. She looked at the two of them and smiled that controlled smile. She said she was worried, that she didn't know where they were, that she had called several times. Henry didn't answer. He just told Olivia to go up to her room. The girl obeyed quickly, happy to avoid confrontation. As soon as Olivia disappeared up the stairs, Caroline's smile vanished. She crossed her arms and asked what was happening. Henry got straight to the point. He said he knew everything, that he had the recordings, that he had the medical report, that he had witnesses, that it was over. Caroline tried to argue, tried to turn the situation around, tried to say he was being manipulated, that he was seeing things that didn't exist. But Henry was no longer listening. He said he wanted a divorce, that she had until the end of the week to leave the house, that his lawyers would be in contact. Caroline's mask finally fell. Her composure gave way to cold, calculated rage. She said she wouldn't leave easily, that she would fight, that she had rights, that she would expose everything in the press, destroy his reputation, make him regret it. Henry let her speak, and when she finished, he simply said she could try, but that this time the truth was on his side, and that he would protect his daughter, no matter the cost. In the following days, the story began to leak. No one knew exactly how, whether it was someone from the hospital, a staff member, or Child Protective Services itself. But the news spread. A photo of Henry carrying Olivia to the hospital on Christmas Eve went viral on social media. The headline read something about a successful businessman taking his injured daughter to the hospital on Christmas Day. Comments multiplied, some defending, others attacking, many speculating about what had really happened. Caroline saw the opportunity and acted quickly. She gave an interview to a local news website, dressed all in black with red eyes, saying she was the victim of a smear campaign, that Henry was trying to destroy her image to keep all of the couple's assets, that she had always cared for that child as if she were her own daughter, that she was being wronged, persecuted, attacked without reason. The performance was convincing. Many people believed her. Social media was divided, and suddenly the Vancroft story was everywhere. Henry did not respond publicly. His lawyers advised him not to speak to the press, to let everything be resolved through appropriate channels. But the pressure was enormous. Journalists camped outside the mansion. TV cameras filmed the entrance day and night. Every time someone left or entered, there were flashes, shouted questions, speculations. It was a circus. And in the midst of it all, Olivia was frightened, confused, not understanding why all of this was happening. Henry kept her indoors as much as possible. He cancelled commitments, postponed meetings, put everything else aside. His priority now was her. They spent their days together, talking, watching movies, reading books. Henry learned things about his daughter he had never known. He discovered she loved fantasy stories, had a talent for drawing landscapes, and liked classical music. They were simple things, but he had missed them by always being absent. Mrs. Clara continued working in the house, but now with visible relief. She no longer needed to hide, no longer needed to be afraid. She helped Henry take care of Olivia, prepared the girl's favorite foods, and talked with her without that constant tension. The house began to feel like a home again, even with all the chaos happening outside. Caroline, meanwhile, remained in the house, but locked in the guest room. She rarely left. When she did, she avoided crossing paths with Henry and Olivia. The tension was palpable. It was clear that the situation was unsustainable. Something needed to be resolved, and so the hearing was scheduled. The divorce proceedings and the child abuse investigation would be handled together. It would be at the Aspenwood courthouse, in a closed session because it involved a minor. The date was disclosed to the parties and their lawyers, but somehow it leaked to the press. And when the day came, the courthouse was surrounded by journalists, cameras, and curious onlookers. Henry got out of the car holding Olivia's hand. She wore a thick coat, a white scarf covering part of her face, and was clearly frightened by all the commotion. Flashes exploded, questions were shouted from all sides, but Henry didn't stop. He walked steadily, protecting his daughter, until they entered the building. Caroline arrived minutes later, surrounded by her lawyer and some reporters. She was impeccable, as always, but there was something different in her eyes, a hardness, a coldness that the cameras captured perfectly. She made some statements at the courthouse door, reiterating that she was innocent, that she was being persecuted, that the truth would prevail. And then she entered. The session was opened. The judge, a middle-aged man with a serious but fair demeanor, heard the parties. The lawyers presented the evidence. The recordings were played. The medical report was read. Witnesses were called. Mrs. Clara took the stand and, with a trembling but firm voice, confirmed everything. She recounted what she saw, what she heard, what she witnessed over the past few years. Other staff members who no longer worked at the house were also called and corroborated the story. Henry was questioned about his absence, about why he hadn't noticed sooner, about his responsibility for what happened. He didn't try to defend himself. He admitted he had failed, that he was absent, that he had trusted blindly, that he had made terrible mistakes, but that now he was there to correct, to protect, to do what was right. His honesty weighed in his favor. Caroline tried to defend herself. She said everything was an exaggeration, that Olivia was a difficult child, a liar, manipulative, that the recordings were out of context, that she always acted with the best intentions. But as the testimonies accumulated, as the evidence piled up, her version lost strength. Her confident posture gave way to visible uneasiness. Her hands trembled. Her eyes darted away. The mask was definitely falling. The judge listened to everything in silence, taking notes, observing reactions. At the end of the session, he said he would need a few days to analyze all the evidence before rendering a decision. But he made it clear that the priority was the child's well-being, that any measure taken would keep that in mind, and that both parties should await the verdict. When they left the courthouse, Henry and Olivia were again surrounded by the press. But this time Henry stopped. He looked at the cameras and made a brief statement. He said he trusted in justice, that his only concern was his daughter's well-being, that mistakes had been made, but that now the important thing was to move forward, heal the wounds, rebuild. He did not attack Caroline. He made No public accusations. He simply spoke with the dignity of someone who knows they are on the right side. The days that followed were filled with agonizing waiting. Henry tried to maintain as normal a routine as possible for Olivia. He took her for walks, for ice cream, to play in the park. Little by little, the girl opened up more, smiled more, returning to being a child. But there were still moments when she woke up scared, when she flinched at footsteps in the corridor, when she asked if Caroline would come back. And each time Henry hugged her and promised that he wouldn't let anything bad happen to her again. Finally, 2 weeks after the hearing, the verdict arrived. Henry was summoned to a session at the courthouse to hear the decision. He arrived with his lawyers, his heart heavy, afraid of what might happen. The judge began by reading a summary of the case, reviewing the evidence, the testimonies, the circumstances, and then he delivered the sentence. Full custody of Olivia would go to Henry. Caroline would be permanently removed, with a restraining order preventing any approach to the minor. The divorce was granted with the division of assets according to the separation regime they had adopted in the marriage. And more importantly, Caroline was notified that she would face charges for child abuse, which would proceed concurrently. Henry listened to everything with teary eyes. It wasn't a victory. There was no victory in this story, only justice, only the attempt to correct what should never have happened. He thanked the judge, the lawyers, everyone who helped, and he left feeling an enormous relief, mixed with deep sadness. When he arrived home and told Olivia, the girl cried, but this time it wasn't a cry of fear or pain. It was a cry of relief, of liberation, of finally being able to breathe without fear. Henry hugged her tight and promised that from now on it would be different, that they would build a new life together, where she would be the priority, where she would be seen, heard, loved. Caroline left the mansion the following week. She took her belongings in silence, escorted by lawyers, without looking back. She didn't try to say goodbye. She didn't try to speak to Olivia. She just left, leaving behind a house that was never truly a home and a child who was finally free. In the months that followed, Henry completely changed his life. He delegated more responsibilities at work, hired trusted people to manage the day-to-day business, and started working from home whenever possible. His priority now was Olivia. He took her to school, picked her up, helped with homework, attended parent meetings, met her little friends. He was present, truly present. Olivia started therapy to deal with everything she had gone through. At first it was difficult. She didn't like to talk about that period, but little by little, with the support of her father and therapist, she processed, she healed, she learned to trust again. The nightmares diminished, the smiles increased, and slowly she returned to being a normal child. Mrs. Clara continued working with them, but now in a different role. She was more like a grandmother than an employee. She cared for Olivia with affection, made her favorite foods, and talked about everything. And Henry was immensely grateful to her for saving those recordings, for having the courage to show the truth, for protecting his daughter when he wasn't there to do it. The Vancroft story continued to be commented on for a while, on social media and in the local press. But gradually it was forgotten. Other news took its place. Other controversies went viral. And they were finally able to live in peace, away from the spotlight, away from judgment. A year later, on a Christmas very different from the previous one, Henry and Olivia were in the mansion's living room decorating the tree together. There were no staff doing everything. There was no pressure for perfection. It was just the two of them, laughing, talking, placing crooked ornaments that didn't match but were perfect just the way they were. Mrs. Clara was in the kitchen preparing a simple but delicious dinner, humming a Christmas song. Olivia hung an ornament she had made herself at school, all colourful and full of glitter. She looked at her father and smiled, a genuine, happy, free smile, and Henry felt his heart tighten, but in a good way this time, because he knew he had succeeded. He had protected his daughter. He had made peace with his mistakes. He had rebuilt their lives on true foundations. That night, the three of them had dinner together, without formalities, without pressure. They talked about the past year, about plans for the next, about dreams and hopes. And when Olivia went to sleep, Henry went to her room as he did every night. He covered her with the blanket, kissed her forehead, and whispered that he loved her. And she, her eyes already closing with sleep, murmured back that she loved him too. As he left the room, Henry paused in the corridor and looked back. He looked at that house that had been the scene of so much suffering, but which was now beginning to transform into something different, into a place where his daughter could be a child, where she could make mistakes without fear, where she was loved unconditionally. He had learned in the most painful way possible that success is not measured in money, in closed contracts, in accumulated properties. Success is measured in being present, in seeing who is by your side, in protecting those you love, in making the right choices even when they are difficult. And as he went downstairs in that Aspenwood mansion, as the Christmas lights shone softly through the window, Henry knew that he had finally found what truly mattered. It wasn't the perfect image. It wasn't the facade of a family. It was the truth. It was real love, imperfect but present. It was the peace that comes from doing the right thing, even if late. It was the second chance he wouldn't waste. And Olivia, sleeping peacefully in her room, dreamed of good things for the first time in a long time. She dreamed of colorful drawings, of walks in the park, of her father holding her hand. She dreamed of a future where it was safe to be who she was, where it was safe to exist without fear. The Vancrofts' story did not have their happy ending in the traditional sense. It had a just ending. It had an ending where truth prevailed over appearance, where protection overcame neglect, where love, even arriving late, arrived strong enough to make a difference. And sometimes that is more than enough. Sometimes that is all that matters. 6 months had passed since the judgment that forever changed the Vancrofts' lives. Winter had given way to spring, and Aspenwood transformed once again, now with flowers blooming in the gardens and the air filled with a different, lighter, more hopeful scent. In the mansion that once seemed like a prison, life followed a completely new rhythm, built on foundations of truth and presence. Henry woke up early that June morning, as he had grown accustomed to doing in recent months. Not because he had urgent meetings or contracts to close, but because he wanted to have breakfast with Olivia before she went to school. It was a ritual they had created together, a sacred moment that was non-negotiable. He went downstairs to the kitchen and found Mrs. Clara already preparing pancakes, the girl's favorite recipe. The governess looked at him and smiled. There was a lightness in that smile that hadn't existed before. It was as if the whole house breathed differently now, as if the walls had absorbed the new energy and returned it in the form of peace. Henry poured himself coffee and helped Clara set the table, placing plates, cutlery, the honey pot that Olivia loved. Minutes later, the girl came downstairs in her school uniform, backpack on her back, and her hair still a little messy. She had grown. Not physically, although she had also grown a few centimeters, but in a different way. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't existed before, a subtle confidence, still fragile but present. Henry felt his chest tighten with pride and gratitude every time he looked at her like that. They sat together at the table and talked while they ate. Olivia told him about the theatre presentation her class was preparing at school, about how she had been chosen to play one of the main characters. She was nervous, but also excited. Henry encouraged her, said he would be in the front row on the day of the presentation, that he wouldn't miss it for anything. And she believed him because now when he promised to be present, he delivered. After breakfast, Henry took Olivia to school. It was a private school in the center of Aspenwood, with good facilities and attentive teachers. In the first few months, it had been difficult. Olivia was too shy, isolated herself, had difficulty interacting with other children. But little by little, with the support of her therapist and her father's constant encouragement, she opened up. She made friends. She participated in activities. She started smiling spontaneously again. At the school gate, Henry knelt down to her height and lovingly adjusted her uniform collar. He said he loved her, and that he would pick her up at the agreed time. Olivia hugged him quickly and ran inside, waving before disappearing down the corridor. He stood there for a few seconds watching, feeling that mixture of joy and remorse that never completely left him. Joy at seeing her well, remorse for everything she had to go through before getting there. He returned home and went straight to his office. In recent months, he had completely restructured his way of working. He delegated the operational management of the company to trusted partners, kept only the most important strategic decisions, and worked from home most of the time. Meetings were held by video conference, contracts reviewed digitally, travel reduced to the essential minimum. And surprisingly, the company not only did not suffer, but prospered. Because he was more focused, more strategic, more present in the decisions that truly mattered. He worked through the morning, reviewing proposals, answering emails, participating in an online meeting with investors. But at 11:30, he stopped everything, as he did every day for lunch. Mrs. Clara prepared a light meal, and they had lunch together in the kitchen, talking about everyday matters. She said she was thinking of visiting her sister in the London countryside during the next holiday. Henry encouraged her, said she deserved to rest, that he and Olivia would manage a few days alone. In the afternoon, Henry picked Olivia up from school promptly at 5 o'clock. She came out excited, accompanied by 2 classmates who were talking and laughing about something that had happened during physical education class. Seeing her father, she said goodbye to her friends and ran to him. On the way back home, she told him about art class, about the drawing she was doing, about the invitation she received to go to a classmate's birthday party on the weekend. Henry listened to everything with genuine attention, asking questions, truly interested, because he had learned that details matter, that being present is not just being physically there, but being mentally, emotionally, entirely there. And that made all the difference. When they arrived home, Olivia went upstairs to do her homework while Henry prepared a snack. Later, he went up to help her with a math problem she couldn't solve. They sat together at the desk and worked on the problem until she finally understood. The smile of satisfaction when she managed to solve the next question alone was worth more than any multi-million-pound contract he had ever closed. That night, after dinner, they sat in the living room to watch a movie. It was an animation Olivia had chosen, something about a girl who discovered she had magical powers. Henry wasn't a big fan of cartoons, but he watched attentively, laughing at the funny parts, making comments, creating memories. Because he had learned that this is what life is made of small moments that accumulate and transform into something bigger. When the movie ended, Henry accompanied Olivia to her room, waited while she brushed her teeth and changed clothes. Then he sat on the edge of the bed while she settled under the blanket. They had created a ritual of talking a little before bed, a moment when she could talk about anything she was feeling, any fear she had, any joy she wanted to share. That night, Olivia was quiet, thoughtful. Henry noticed and asked what was happening. She hesitated for a moment, then asked if he thought she was strong. The question took him by surprise. He held her hand and said yes, that she was the strongest person he knew, that she had gone through things no child should ever go through, but that she had survived, had recovered, had started smiling again, that this was true strength. Olivia processed the words in silence, then said she was still scared sometimes, that she still woke up startled in the middle of the night, that sometimes she heard a noise and her body tensed, expecting something bad. Henry felt the familiar pain in his chest, that guilt that never completely abandoned him. But he told her it was normal, that healing takes time, that fears don't disappear overnight, but they get smaller, more controllable, and that he would always be there to protect her when the fears appeared. She smiled, a small but sincere smile, and said she knew, that she trusted him. And those words were like a balm to Henry's soul, because they meant he was doing something right, that he was rebuilding the bridge he had allowed to break, that there was still time to fix what had been destroyed. Before leaving the room, Henry kissed his daughter's forehead and said he loved her. She replied back, her voice already sleepy. He turned off the light, left only the bedside lamp on as she liked, and left, leaving the door ajar. In the corridor, he paused and took a deep breath. There were difficult days, moments when the guilt weighed so heavily that it seemed impossible to carry. But there were also moments like that, When he saw the progress, saw the healing happening, saw his daughter becoming a child again, and that gave him the strength to continue. He went down to the living room and sat on the sofa, picking up a book he was reading. But he couldn't concentrate. His mind wandered to the past, to everything that had happened, to the choices he made and the consequences that came. Caroline was far away now. After the trial, she had left Aspenwood and returned to London. She tried to appeal the court's decision, but without success. The evidence was too strong, the testimonies too consistent, and over time the story faded from the spotlight and she was able to rebuild her life away from there. Henry sometimes found himself thinking about her, not with anger or resentment, but with a deep sadness for everything that could have been different, for how a person could be so cruel to an innocent child, for how he had been so blind not to notice. But he had learned not to dwell on the past. He had learned that the important thing was the present, what he was doing now, how he was taking care of his daughter today. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer calling to inform him that the criminal case against Caroline had concluded. She had been sentenced to alternative punishment and community service, in addition to having to pay compensation for moral damages. It wasn't the maximum possible punishment, but it was justice. It was official recognition that what she did was wrong, and in a way, that brought a sense of closure. Henry thanked him for the information and hung up. He wasn't going to tell Olivia yet. He thought she didn't need to know all the legal details. The important thing was that she was safe, that she was protected, that none of that would happen again. The rest was just bureaucracy, the closing of a chapter that was already closed anyway. He went up to his own room and prepared for bed. But before turning off the light, he went to Olivia's room one last time just to check if she was okay. He found her sleeping peacefully, with the teddy bear he had given her the week before hugged against her chest. He stood there for a few seconds, observing her calm breathing, her relaxed face, the peace that had finally settled. And at that moment, Henry made a silent promise. He promised that he would never again let work, commitments, distractions pull him away from what truly mattered. He promised that he would be present in every phase of his daughter's life, in the good times and the bad, in joys and difficulties. He promised that he would be the father she always deserved to have. And this time, it was a promise he would keep until the end. He returned to his room with a lighter heart. He lay down in bed and for the first time in a long time slept in peace, because he knew he had done the right thing, that he had protected his daughter, that he had chosen love over convenience, and that, despite all the suffering, all the mistakes, all the lost time, there was still time to build something beautiful. There was still time to be happy, and that in the end was all that truly mattered.